Gather close, friends, and let the fire's warmth guard against the chill of the night. For tonight, I shall tell you of Helm Hammerhand, a king of Rohan, whose deeds echo still in the valleys and the mountains. His tale is one of strength, sorrow, and unyielding will, a tale to remind us of who we are and the blood that runs in our veins. Long ago, in the days of our fathers' fathers, Helm Hammerhand sat upon the throne of the Mark. Grim he was, and strong beyond the measure of mortal men. His fists alone could do what swords could not. Yet, though his heart was as steadfast as stone, his days were darkened by treachery. There lived then a man named Freka, a lord of wide lands near the source of the Adorn. Freka claimed kinship with our kings of old, yet his blood was tainted, for the Dunlendings ran thick in his veins. Rich he was, with a following of stout men, and bold enough to defy the will of Helm. Freka came to Edoras only when it pleased him, yet Helm, ever watchful, called him to his councils. At one such council, Freka arrived with a retinue of many men, a proud display, though none doubted who commanded the room when Helm sat in Meduseld. It was then that Freka spoke his boldest words. "Helm, son of Gram," he began, his voice smooth and full of pretense. "I bring an offer of strength and unity. Let my son Wulf take your daughter as wife. Through this bond, our houses will grow strong, and the Mark will prosper." The room fell silent, all eyes on Helm. He rose then, tall and grim, his gaze fixed on Freka. A shadow of displeasure darkened his brow, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of iron. "You have grown big since last you were here," said Helm, his words cutting deep. "But it is mostly fat, I guess." At this, a roar of laughter filled the hall, for Freka's girth was well known, and Helm's words struck true. But Freka's pride could not bear the mockery, and his face turned red with rage. "You dare mock me," he bellowed. "Beware, Hammerhand. Old kings who refuse a proffered staff may find themselves falling to their knees." Helm did not flinch. He looked down at Freka, his cold stare like the shadow of a storm. "Come," he said. "The marriage of your son is but a trifle. Let us deal with it later, for the king and his council have greater matters to consider." When the council was ended, Helm rose again and approached Freka. His great hand fell heavy on Freka's shoulder. "The king permits no brawls in his hall," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "but men are freer outside." And so, Helm drove Freka out of Meduseld, forcing him into the fields beyond the gates of Edoras. Freka's men stirred, their hands to their swords, but Helm turned to them and said, "Be off. You are not needed here. This is between Freka and me." There, alone in the field, Helm confronted Freka. "Now, Dunlending," he said, "you have only Helm to deal with, alone and unarmed. You speak of staffs and kings. If Helm dislikes a crooked staff, he breaks it." With that, Helm struck Freka with his fist, a blow so mighty that it felled him like a tree. Freka fell, never to rise again. Helm, grim as ever, returned to his hall. He proclaimed Freka's kin enemies of the Mark, and Freka's son, Wulf, fled into the west, vowing vengeance. In the year of the long winter, Wulf returned, leading a host of Dunlendings and their allies. While Gondor faced its own perils with the corsairs of Umbar, Rohan stood alone. Wulf's army swept across the Mark, and our people were driven from their homes. Helm, with what men he could muster, made his stand at the Hornburg, that ancient stronghold in the shadow of the mountains. There, besieged and outnumbered, the king held firm. Wulf, in his arrogance, took Edoras and sat in the Golden Hall, calling himself king. But the long winter came, bitter and unrelenting. Snow buried the fields, and frost crept into every corner of the land. In Helm's Deep, provisions ran low, and despair gripped the hearts of the defenders. First fell Haleth, Helm's elder son, defending the doors of Meduseld. Then Háma, his younger son, ventured out in search of food, but he and his company were lost in the snow. Helm, gaunt with grief and hunger, grew fiercer still. Clad in white like the snow itself, he would stalk the enemy camps at night, his great horn echoing through the ravine. With his bare hands, he struck down any who dared stand against him. The Dunlendings began to fear him as they feared the snow trolls of old, whispering that Helm devoured the bodies of those he killed. One night, the horn of Helm sounded, but he did not return. When the sun rose, they saw him, a white figure standing still upon the dike. Helm was dead, yet he stood unbent, as if defying death itself. When the snows melted and the rivers swelled, Frealaf, Helm's nephew, led a daring assault on Edoras. With a small band of men, he slew Wulf in the Golden Hall and reclaimed the throne. The floods drove out the remaining invaders, and aid from Gondor came at last. Helm was laid to rest in the 9th mound of the kings of Rohan, and ever after, white Cymbalmine grew thick upon his tomb, like snow that never melts. His name lives on in the Hornburg, now called Helm's Deep, where the echoes of his great horn still haunt the ravine. So remember, my friends, in the face of despair, stand tall like Helm Hammerhand, for though the shadow may fall, the strength of the mark endures.